In this mini lecture, we'll go through the larynx, a little bit about the vagus nerve and the laryngeal muscles. So, first things first, we'll go through some of the cartilages associated with the larynx. There's a few different cartilages that you have to know. Obviously, the epiglottic cartilage, or the epiglottis. It's a leaf-like structure that can close and open. We have the thyroid cartilage. It's the main cartilage here. Thyroid in Latin means like shield or something. That's why it's named that, because it kind of looks like a shield. And we have the cricoid cartilage. The cricoid cartilage, cricoid means ring, so it's completely circular. And then we have the arytenoid cartilage, which sits on top of the cricoid cartilage. Normally joints exist between bones, but there are joints here that exist between cartilages. So the joint here between the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage is the cricothyroid joint. The cricothyroid joint. The cricothyroid joint is a synovial joint. The other joint you have to be aware of is the joint that the arytenoid cartilage makes with the cricoid cartilage. You can't see it here because all the muscles are interfering, but that is also, it essentially sits on top of the cricoid cartilage. Let's see if I can show you from this side. So it's the arytenoid cartilage sitting on top of the cricoid cartilage. Yeah, it's hard to see because all the muscles are in the way. Excellent. So that's the arytenoid cartilage. It's sitting on the cricoid cartilage, and this joint that it makes is the cricoarytenoid joint. It's also a synovial joint. And these joints just allow movement or small movements between these cartilages so that the vocal ligaments can change and that we can speak and breathe. So we'll go through some of the muscles associated with moving these muscles. The first one, I might remove some things actually. The first one we'll talk about is the cricothyroid muscle. Now, all of these muscles are named after the cartilages that they attach to. So, for example, cricothyroid muscle attaches to the cricoid cartilage, to the thyroid cartilage. So the cricothyroid muscle, if you picture it, if it contracts, the cricoid cartilage will rock backwards. If it rocks backwards, so it'll move this way. So picture this muscle contracting. This part of the cartilage will rock backwards on this axis, on this joint. And what that'll do is it'll pull these ligaments backwards, the vocal ligaments. If the vocal ligaments are pulled backwards, then they are tightened and lengthened. So that is the function of the cricothyroid muscle. It is to lengthen and tighten the vocal ligaments. These are the vocal ligaments, by the way. Yeah, the vocal ligaments. So that's the first muscle. The next muscle we'll talk about is this muscle. This is the posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. The posterior cricoarytenoid muscle, which means there is a different cricoarytenoid muscle that is not posterior, and that is the lateral cricoarytenoid muscle. So there are two cricoarytenoid muscles. The posterior one is the only abductor of the arytenoid cartilage. And what I mean by that is when it contracts, it is attached to the arytenoid cartilage laterally. So when it contracts, it pulls the posterior part of the arytenoid cartilage. It pulls it this way, and so this part of the arytenoid cartilage will go that way. Does that make sense? So the back part here will pull this way, and the front part will rotate outwards. So it's kind of so that this right one here would be rotating clockwise. This is known as abduction of the arytenoid cartilage, and as such is the as such it opens up the vocal inlet here, and it widens up this area. It is the only abductor of of the vocal ligament. Okay, next we have the lateral cricoarachnoid, and this opposes the function of the posterior cricoarachnoid, because when it pulls in this direction. This right arachnoid cartilage would rotate anti-clockwise. So this will go forward, this part would go backwards, and this is known as adduction of the arachnoid cartilage. Adduction of the arachnoid cartilage. So those three muscles are the only muscles that act on the cricoid cartilage, and I've gone through them first. So the cricothyroid muscle, the posterior cricoarachnoid muscle, and the lateral cricoarachnoid muscle. The next three muscles I'm going to talk about are sphincter muscles that work to close the vocal inlet. They work to close the vocal inlet. So these muscles are the transverse arachnoid muscle together with the oblique. I'm going to count them as one. The transverse and oblique. And then we have the aryepiglottic muscles. Aryepiglottic muscles in this model, like they've split up the oblique part and the aryepiglottic. So this technically should be part of one muscle, but we'll call it one muscle. So the aryepiglottic attaches from the arachnoid cartilage to the epiglottis. Aryepiglottic. The transverse arachnoid goes from one arachnoid to the other arachnoid, and the thyroarachnoid. The thyroarachnoid goes from the thyroid cartilage to the arachnoid cartilage, or it's otherwise known as the vocalis muscle. Okay, so those three are the sphincter muscles, and you can see why, because when they all contract, they all narrow. Well, okay, the transverse arachnoid narrows the distance between the arachnoid cartilages, so it pulls them together. Similarly, the aryepiglottic part, or the aryepiglottic muscle, when it tightens, it pulls these two together. And the vocalis muscle, or the thyroarachnoid muscle, also when it contracts, it shortens and narrows the vocal ligament. So those three muscles, we'll go through them again: the transverse arachnoid, the aryepiglottic muscle, and the thyroarachnoid muscle. Those are sphincter muscles that work to close the inlet or narrow the inlet. Okay. The final muscle is the thyroepiglottic muscle. The thyroepiglottic muscle, which is here, the thyroepiglottic muscle, and this works to widen the inlet. Because it involves pulling the epiglottis open. So when it attaches to the epiglottis, it pulls it open and widens the inlet. Closing of the inlet, as we said before, was the aryepiglottic muscle, the thyroarachnoid muscle, and the transverse arachnoid muscle. It's a bit hard to picture the actions of these muscles, given they're not attached completely to the epiglottis. But this epiglottis would be closed in this circumstance, because it'd be contracting the muscle. Now we'll go through these muscles once again. So there's three cricoid muscles: cricothyroid, posterior cricoarachnoid, lateral cricoarachnoid. And then you have three sphincter muscles that work to close the inlet. You have the transverse arachnoid muscle, goes from arachnoid to arachnoid contralaterally. You have the aryepiglottic muscle, which goes from the arachnoid cartilage to the epiglottis, and then you have the thyroepiglottic muscle. The vocalis muscle, or the thyroarachnoid muscle. The thyroarachnoid muscle, which closes the inlet, and then the one that opens the inlet is the thyroepiglottic muscle. Okay, so all of those muscles are innervated by the recurrent laryngeal nerve, specifically the inferior branch of the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So, and the cricothyroid muscle is the only one that is innervated by the external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve. Now, this will make more sense after I go through the course of the vagus nerve. I'll just go into it in brief detail. So it exits the skull at the jugular foramen and immediately gives off two sensory ganglion, the superior and inferior ganglions. These are completely sensory. Okay, after it gives off the inferior ganglion, or after it gives off the inferior ganglion, the main branch continues down and continues in the carotid sheath, as you may know. And this is where it differs between left and right. Everything up here is the same in terms of this part, but as it exits the thoracic inlet, it differs left and right. The left side bends, gives off a branch under the arch of the aorta. It's known as the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Recurrent because it exits the thoracic inlet and then comes back in, so therefore it's recurrent. Under the arch of the aorta on the left side, and on the right side it's under the subclavian artery. It's the same after that. It's just the point that it becomes a recurrent is different left and right. So that's the main course of the main branch of the vagus nerve. But it also gives off some other branches as well. So the pharyngeal branch, if you've watched the lecture on pharynx, is given off at the same location, and it forms the pharyngeal plexus with the glossopharyngeal nerve to innervate the superior constrictor muscles. The constrictor muscles, but not the inferior constrictor muscle. The inferior constrictor muscle is innervated by a different nerve. So the pharyngeal branch becomes the pharyngeal plexus with the glossopharyngeal nerve. It also gives off the superior laryngeal nerve, as well as, actually we'll go through the carotid bodies first. It gives off a branch of the carotid bodies, and this gives chemoreceptor information from the carotid body. So the common carotid artery has a carotid body here, and chemoreceptor information is given by the vagus nerve through the carotid body branches of vagus nerve. So it has the main branch, it has the common carotid body branches, it has the pharyngeal branch, but it also has the superior laryngeal branch. The superior laryngeal branch gives off an internal branch which pierces the thyrohyoid membrane, which you can't see here. It pierces that, and this provides sensation to the epiglottis and the tongue. So in between the terminal part of the tongue, between the epiglottis, the valleculae, and that sort of region. And then you have the external branch. The external branch is motor innervation to the inferior constrictor muscle, and cricothyroid. So superior and middle constrictor muscles are innervated by the pharyngeal plexus. The inferior constrictor muscle, as well as the cricothyroid muscle, are innervated by the external branch of superior laryngeal. And so, yes, after the vagus nerve exits the thoracic inlet and returns back to as the recurrent laryngeal nerve, it provides motor innervation to the rest of the laryngeal muscles through an inferior branch. It's not detailed here, but the inferior branch of the recurrent laryngeal nerve innervates the laryngeal muscles, all of them except cricothyroid, which is innervated by the external branch of superior laryngeal. So, and finally, the arterial supply of the larynx is by the superior laryngeal artery, which is the first branch of the external carotid artery. And this is also the same for the thyroid gland. It shares the same arterial innervation, or the arterial supply. Thanks for listening. I wanted to update something from the previous lecture. So this vocalis muscle is different to this muscle, which is known as the thyroarachnoid muscle. It's different to it. I think in the previous part of the video, or in the earlier part of the video, I said it was the same thing. It's different, it just does the same actions. So in reality, there are 4 muscles that close the sphincter. We have the vocalis, the thyroarachnoid, the transverse arachnoid, and the aryepiglottic, which is technically has 2 parts. It has the oblique part and then the aryepiglottic part. So I just want to clear that up. The vocalis muscle is different to that of the thyroarachnoid muscle, but it works to do the same thing since it attaches to the same place. Thanks for watching.